This chapter is about supply chain management. Supply chain is usually defined as the sequence of organizations, their facilities, functions, and activities that are involved in producing and delivering a product or service. So, a sequence of organizations, which mean a supply chains, modern supply chains typically are made up of several entities, independent entities. So there's an organization, and then they have suppliers, and then suppliers, they have their own suppliers, and then the core company, they might have third party logistics service provider. There could be warehousing, storage, etc. So all supply chains is a series of entities that coordinate with each other to provide services seamlessly, and that is called as supply chain. Why this topic is important? Because in a supply chain, multiple entities are involved, and they are independent entities, and they are doing transactions with each other, they are coordinating with each other. And therefore it's very important that these supply chains, they are streamlined. The movement of materials is streamlined. But the biggest objective of supply chain management is that we want to align the supply side with the demand side. And by the supply side, again, for instance, just imagine there's an organization in the center. On the left side, there are some suppliers. On the right side, it's downstream supply chain. We want to match supply with the demand, because that's the ultimate objective of any supply chain or any organization. This is why organizations exist, because they want to provide their products or services efficiently. And in the context of supply chain, it means that the supply side, that's also called as upstream supply chain, is aligned with the downstream supply chain, and that's also called as a demand side. And any organization that efficiently manages the demand and supply and aligns them can be considered as a good supply chain. Then there is logistics, which is a small part of supply chain. We call it's the part of supply chain involved with the forward and reverse flow of goods, services, cash, and information. So logistics is the part of supply chain that's concerned with the movement, and this is a part that's very frequently visible to us, and some people would erroneously think that this is the whole supply chain, but actually that's only one component of supply chain. Supply chains, they are much broader. They are about planning, about organizing, managing suppliers, integration, vertical integration, horizontal integration, and managing processes, integration of technologies. And that part that's concerned with the movement, that's called logistics, which is a small component of supply chains. How do we understand supply chain, or how do we define supply chain, or in other words, managers, supply chain managers, what things they do? So there's a model that's called a SCORE model, which is the abbreviation of supply chains operations reference model. So this is the model that describes what a supply chain is and what are its critical functions. And according to this model, the first component in a supply chain is planning, which means upfront planning, that what you are going to do, what would be the main structure of supply chain, and what would be the unique selling proposition, how your supply chain would be different, where you will be sourcing your raw materials, to what extent there will be vertical integration. Are you also going to make some parts yourself, or would you be sourcing them from suppliers? And what about your suppliers? Are your suppliers local, or are you going to also get from international suppliers? And what about your manufacturing? Do you plan to do manufacturing locally, or do you just want to focus on design part? So for instance, in case of Apple, we know Apple mainly focuses on the design part. So all Apple products, they are designed in California but made by a company that's called Foxconn company. So all these things, they constitute planning. And then sourcing, which means where you are going to buy your materials. Now this is something that's critical component. It's something that incurs a huge cost to organizations. Just imagine an automobile company like Honda, Toyota, etc. Now we know that these companies they are automobile assemblers, which mean they assemble parts, but they also get material from their suppliers. So, for example, in order to make a frame of the car, they need steel. So, there must be a supplier of steel. There must be a supplier of tires. And some companies they have more than 100,000 suppliers. So, for example, it should not be surprising if I tell you that Walmart has more than 100,000 suppliers. And similarly, other companies like Boeing, Airbus, they also have several thousands suppliers. All companies, Volkswagen, they also have several thousand suppliers. Procter and Gamble, Unilever, again, they have a huge supplier base. Then the next part is transformation, whereby you convert your raw materials into a product. And supply chain operations, according to this model, deciding upfront that how you are going to do that. And most importantly, what would be the extent of integration, vertical integration. So by vertical integration, I mean to what extent a company prepares or manufactures its part itself, or alternatively it buys from other suppliers. So one of the best example is Tesla. Tesla makes many components itself. For example, in an electric car, one of the critical component is battery. Now, while most other electric car companies they buy batteries from other suppliers, Tesla makes its own batteries. It has established a collaboration with Panasonic, and it also has its own gigafactories whereby it's producing its own battery, which is a critical component. Tesla even makes its own seats. Its factory at Fremont, they make their own seats. And in addition, they also it's also an artificial intelligence company, which means they focus a lot on artificial intelligence for the self-driving cars and for the programs. So that type of thing, that is called as vertical integration. And then deliver part, which means delivering a product to the customer. And the last thing is reverse logistics, which means making decisions and developing policies. What would be the shape of reverse logistics? What would be the policies? I mean, let's say if a product is found to be faulty, then it needs to be sent back to the manufacturer, especially when as long as it's in within warranty, then that part is called as reverse logistics. Or if a product expires and it needs to be recycled, then again that part is called as reverse logistics, which means moving a product from the customer to the manufacturer or any other place where it could be processed. According to supply chains operations reference model, which is the most important model in supply chain, these are 5 components of a supply chain. Whenever someone asks you, okay, define supply chain, it would be in terms of these 5 components. Supply chain managers, they spend most of their time on these 5 activities, or the design of a supply chain management would start from these 5 deliberation and planning about these 5 components. What is the difference between supply chains and value chains? So supply chain is the default version, which means whereby things they start from supplier, and suppliers may have their own suppliers. So that's what we call tier 1 supplier and tier 2 suppliers, and then they move along to manufacturing, and this side is called as upstream supply chain. So on the left side of manufacturer, that part of supply chain is upstream supply chain, and the part on the right side of manufacturer, this blue color, that's called as downstream supply chain. So in a normal supply chain, things move from supplier to storage manufacturer, distributor, retailer, and customer. Let me explain it with an example. As you might have noticed, so for instance, if you ever go to Walmart and find some sliced pineapples, or maybe at another retail store, You may notice a very strange thing, or at least I have noted it. So we know that these pineapples, they are grown or produced in South America, some South American countries like Chile or Nicaragua. From there, these pineapples, they are taken to Thailand, whereby they are sliced and they are canned, some syrup is added and packaging is done, and that finished product, that canned product, is then brought back again to North America, which means every time you buy something, sliced cans, most likely they have been produced in South America and then they were taken to Thailand, where they have very good canning industry, and then they were brought back to the United States or Canada. Now, in this process, as you can see, the product has traveled several thousand miles. So, a product that is produced in your neighborhood, it's not coming directly to you, it's traveling worldwide. This is crazy. And the thing is that every time this product is moving, some cost is being accumulated, some cost is being incurred. I mean, if the product is moving, of course there are shipping, logistic cost associated with that. And who is gonna pay these costs? Of course it's the customer at the end of the supply chain. Why this happens? So this is a default supply chain. Now the question is that why does this happen? This happens because these supply chains, they are usually not designed on a scientific basis, but they are designed on the basis of as the need arises. So managers will use ad hoc measures, so there is no scientific basis for that. However, when you design these supply chains on a scientific basis, whereby you remove all those activities that do not add value, and instead you add activities that bring value, or maybe you use technology so that value addition is increased, then that supply chain is converted into a value chain. So a supply chain is a default version, but once you improve it in terms of value creation, making it lean, removing those activities that do not add value, then that becomes a value chain. And one of the analogy that I can use here to explain the difference between supply chain and value chains is type 1 and type 2 reasoning. So one of the Nobel laureate scientists, his name is Daniel Kahneman, he proposed this idea that we use two type of thinking, type 1 and type 2 thinking. So type 1 thinking is very quick, it's very intuitive, and type 2 thinking is slow, it's deliberate, it's conscious. Now we use these two type of thinking or reasoning in our daily life. For example, if I ask you what is 2 plus 2, you didn't do any calculation, you didn't actually count it, so that would be type 1. But on the other hand, if I ask you a more advanced mathematical problem, then that requires deliberation, then that would be type 2 reasoning. Another example of type 1 thinking is, just imagine when you are hungry and you go to your kitchen and open refrigerator, and anything you can find, you just pick it up and you eat it. So you don't pay much attention. Anything you can lay your hand on, you just eat it. Or maybe you might find ramen noodles because they are very quick to make, you can just make them in 3 or 4 minutes, so you eat them. That's type 1 decision, and in this case you don't think much about what you are eating. But type 2 thinking would be your diet, when you think, okay, I need protein shakes to fulfill my protein needs, or maybe you need a mix of some carbohydrates and fats and maybe avoiding sugar. So that would be type 2, whereby you make conscious decision of what to eat and what to avoid. Similarly, one more example of this type 1 and type 2 is that you are driving. An example of type 1 thinking would be that going too close to a car, whereby tailgating starts, and or you swerve quickly, so that will be type 1. But type 2 would be more conscious and mindful driving, whereby you maintain sufficient distance from the car in front of you. You use blinkers and you are looking around, you are looking in the rear view mirror to see. So that would be type 2. Using this analogy to explain the difference between supply chain and value chains is that supply chains are type 1, whereas value chain would be a type 2 design. Then in supply chain, there are different types of facilities that are there. For example, in any supply chain, there will be warehouses where things are stored, and then there are factories, and then there are processing centers. So for example, one example of processing center, they could be in the form of distribution centers, or they are adding some sort of value. They are doing something. If you order a phone from Amazon and you also order something more, whether it's you order a charging cable with your phone, and you also order a screen protector. So all these things are closely related to each other, so they will cluster them into one package. That's called as kitting. So in kitting, they will cluster all these similar items together. So processing center, they do different types of things, and one example of activity would be processing center. And then distribution center, retail outlets, and offices. These are some of the functions in supply chain, and one of the is forecasting. And in forecasting, we use different types of techniques like moving average, weighted moving average, exponential smoothing, and regression analysis for forecasting. And then purchasing from suppliers, and then inventory management, forecasting. They are usually separate chapters in supply chain. So inventory management, we know that inventory is a double-edged sword, which means on the one hand it's good, but on the other hand it's also a liability, because it incurs cost. Whenever you have inventory, there's a holding cost that you have to pay, and then there are many types of risk. For example, a product may become obsolete. I mean, just imagine a processor of a computer. I mean, these processors, just imagine if you have a MacBook, then maybe you might have M1 chip, and then the next year M2 chip was there. That's a processor. And maybe the next year it will be M3 chip. Things become obsolete. Similarly, your textbook, every year or maybe every few years, there is a new version, a new edition. A bookstore buys too many books, which means they will face this risk that their product will become obsolete. Every time a new edition comes, then the previous version become obsolete. So which means holding more inventory will be harmful to them. And then information management, I will discuss this in more detail in the next slide. And then quality assurance, which means making sure all quality requirements and quality control, inspection, quality assurance, and quality management, and then scheduling, production delivery, and customer service. So these are some common activities, some common functions in a supply chain. Now, one thing that I want to explain is about information management that we just discussed here. The purpose of information management is that, for example, I would give an example of Walmart. At Walmart, every time you buy a product at register, they scan a product. Now, this information can be shared directly with the supplier. So, which means that both supplier and Walmart, they have transparency and they are exchanging information in real time. So that's called as information management. And in this case, a supplier cannot say that, oh, we did not know that a product is out of stock, because every time you are buying something, that information is being shared with the supplier. So the model of Walmart is that Walmart is only providing shelves, but it is the responsibility of supplier to make sure that their product is always available at shelves. And actually supplier would do that gladly because it is their product. They are making money based on that. So this is an epic example of Walmart, how Walmart uses information management, which means they share data. I mean, every time they scan it, that barcode is converted into information and that is shared with their supplier. And they don't have just one supplier, they have thousands of suppliers. or maybe more than 100,000 suppliers they have. So that is a part of information management. And as a part of information management, I would like to give another example of Aldi, which is a German company, and they also use information management to enhance their efficiency. You might have noted at some time when you buy something at Walmart, a person at the register, sometimes they have to flip the product to see, oh, where is the barcode? And sometimes they cannot figure out barcode, and sometimes they have to stretch the product because if the packaging is crumbled, so they have to pull it and stretch it to make sure barcode is exposed and it is scanned. Or for example, if it's a refrigerated product, maybe there is some ice on that and they have to scratch it. So all these things, these are not adding any value. So Aldi, which is a German company, they have found a solution to this problem, and their solution is that they ask their suppliers to print barcode on all sides of the product. So for instance, here's a product. So you can see this is the front side of the product and here's a barcode. And this is the back side of the product, and again there's a barcode. And they will have multiple scanners, or at least two scanners. One is on the bottom under the glass and another scanner on one side. So which means when they are just quickly passing the product, the scanner will pick up information from the barcode. Now you might be wondering that does it really saves a time? For instance, if they save like half a second, is it really worth it? Yes, it is worth it, because if you see it scientifically, objectively, and if you do calculation, you will find that it does make difference. I mean, just imagine when you go for groceries, and if you buy 20 or 30 items, and if you save even a half second for one product, and if you multiply it by 20 or 30, I mean depending upon how many items you are buying, that will be big one. Now multiply it with the number of customers in that queue, that will be the time they are saving. And now multiply it with the number of queues in that retail store, number of lines. Okay, now multiply that with the number of retail stores in that city, and then multiply it by the number of cities in the country. So the thing is that when you keep doing that, you find that these things, they really make a difference. And the thing is that they are also ergonomically efficient. Ergonomics, it's one of the branch of science whereby you want to make sure that all the things you are doing, they do not cause stress on your body. So every time if you keep flipping a product, and that might be stressful to your joints, and that may cause fatigue, and the person may become tired soon. But the thing is that by doing this technique, they make things more efficient. And one more thing, I would say it's not just driven by efficiency. I mean, although efficiency and cost is one of the main factor in these type of decisions, but there is one more thing, and that thing is identify yourself as a pro technology, which means the someone who is front runner or leader in adoption of new technologies. So that becomes the identity of a company. Okay, here is another definition of supply chain, and one of the key word here is the strategic coordination of business function within a business organization and throughout its supply chain for the purpose of integrating supply and demand management. Now, in this definition, there are two key words that I want to emphasize. One thing is strategic, which means that supply chains, they tend to be strategic. And it also means that when you are doing something, you are using it as a means to gain competitive advantage. I mean, there's a one very famous saying that nowadays competition is not between organizations, rather competition is between supply chains. So that is the importance. And by strategic which mean you use your supply chains to create an advantage or to create a difference from others. That becomes your unique selling proposition. You differentiate yourself. If your strategy is being a cost leader, for example, in case of Walmart, the strategy of Walmart is cost leader. I mean, when they have this slogan that lower prices every day, and when a company like Walmart says that low prices every day, they mean it. They should mean it. They cannot just say hollow slogans. So this is something that's called a strategic coordination, which means that you use your supply chain to create a strategic advantage. It's a part of your strategy. And second thing is, the purpose of supply chain is that you want to align supply and demand. And again, here in this slide, as you can see, this is the supply side and this is the demand side. So manufacturer, this one in blue color, on the left side is the supply side, and on the right side it's the demand side. Here's the customer and here's the supplier. So your objective is that you want to align or match demand with the supply, because that is what an efficient supply chain is supposed to do. If you cannot match demand with the supply, then there will always be some problem. For example, if supply is low, then what would happen? There will be stockouts, and stock out is not a good thing. I mean, just imagine if you have to tell your customers that sorry, this product is not available. That's not a good thing. Or if this side is producing more and there is less demand, but there is supply side is more, in that case you will end up holding more inventory, which will add to your cost and it will decrease your cost competitiveness. So this is the key objective of supply chain, that is to match demand with the supply. Again, therefore, I would say that whenever we talk about supply chains, remember these two things. One is the strategic coordination, which means one of the opposite of strategic is ad hoc, whereby you are just doing things on ad hoc basis. In flow management, there are three types of flow management. One thing is product and service flow, which means that it involves movement of goods and services from supplier to customer, as well as handling customer service needs and product returns. So again, there will be, in this flow, there will be upstream part and downstream part. And then information flow, as we just discussed earlier, that information sharing with suppliers, that's a critical component in any supply chain. And then financial flow, which mean credit terms, payments, and consignment and title ownership arrangement. Now remember that some companies, they have more than 100,000 suppliers. Walmart is one company, Boeing is another company, Volkswagen is another company, Airbus is another company, Procter and Gamble is another company, Unilever. So all these companies, they have a large supplier base, and when they are coordinating with them, and also when we talk about financial flow, which means you need to develop the systems whereby these transactions take place smoothly. So that is also a key part of supply chain. What are the trends in supply chain management? So if you ask a supply chain manager what are the latest things where they spend most of their time, they would tell you that the first thing is measuring supply chain return on investment. Most of the supply chains, you have to invest in technologies, and when you want to invest in technology, then there is an expectation that they should produce some profit, they should give you some returns. So that is called as measuring supply chain return on investment. And indeed, just imagine if you are a supply chain manager and you go to your CEO and you say, okay, I want to implement technology like self-checkout, and therefore I need more money. The CEO will ask you a question, and they should ask you a question that, okay, if I give you this much money, how much what would be the ROI, return on investment? In how many years you will be able to recoup that? So that's called as measuring supply chain ROI. And then greening the supply chain, which means investing in green technologies. Now, I would like to give here one example here. Now, you know about Amazon. Amazon, they have thousands of vehicles in the United States that are running on roads. And of course, when these vehicles are running on a road, they use fossil fuel, they produce greenhouse gases. And just imagine what is their footprint. Thousands of vehicles. You can imagine that their footprint will be really, really big. That's their business model. That's how they work. I mean, it's Amazon. One of the key part is logistics, and in logistics this thing happens. Amazon is also aware of this problem, that their footprint, carbon footprint, is big and they need to do something, and they actually try to do something. You know, there is an electric vehicle company, Rivian. Amazon invested several $billion in Rivian, and the expectation was that when Rivian will be making cars, Amazon will be the first one to use. They invest in information systems. By information system, another part is routing. Routing means that these companies, they use sophisticated system. Their system will tell you that, okay, no, you deliver to this house, and then after that you go to that house. And in the more sophisticated system, that system also includes, okay, at this time there will be too much congestion on roads, so it's better that you cover this area first and then doing that. So these investment, they also include information system, not only just logistics or technologies, but also information system. And then re-evaluating outsourcing, because re-evaluating outsourcing, it has economic impact, it also has political connotations. When you are outsourcing something from other suppliers abroad, then of course there are some implications for that. Your supply chain may not be secure. So managers spend most of their time on these issues, whereby they say, okay, how can we minimize that risk? Apple designs product, but actually they are manufactured by a company that's called Foxconn in China. And recently Apple made a decision to shift their production, or some part of their production, to India, but I think that didn't work, and they had to shut down that plant. So re-evaluating outsourcing, how does it affect your quality, how does it affect your cost? And then integrating it is one of the biggest enabler of efficient supply chains. And then adopting lean principles. So the idea of lean principles is that you want to remove waste from your processes. Now, one of the analogy that I would like to use here for lean principles is that if you buy meat from a butcher, not packaged meat that has already been packaged, I'm not talking about that, but if you buy meat from a butcher and you pay for that, but when you bring that meat home, you may find that there are some bones which you may not like, or maybe there's some fat which you may not like. If you are looking for lean meat, and you strip off that fat and bones depending upon your personal preferences. When you were buying that meat, you paid for bones and fats, but when you bring it home, you throw them. But you paid for that because they contributed to the weight of the meat that you paid that. When you remove waste from a process, that is called lean. Just like we say the lean meat, which means the meat that's without any fat. So when we remove wastage from our processes, in a supply chain processes, that is called as lean principles. Now, for example, I just want to give you an example. In the supply chain of cars like Ford, Chevrolet, GM, etc. Now, you know that there are dealers. So you go to a dealer and then you buy a car, and that's it. But have you ever seen a dealer of Tesla? I haven't seen any, because they don't have this dealership model. They supply directly to the customer. Now, There can be pros and cons, there can be arguments in favor of that and against that, but the thing is that when you have this type of mindset whereby you want to remove any activity that is not adding value to your processes but it still increases your cost and you remove it, this is called as lean production or lean services. And the last thing in this slide is managing risk. It is perhaps one of the most important thing. I mean, every time something might happen, any type of risk happen, and these risks, they can be natural risk, they can be man-made risk. So, for example, some natural risk could be, COVID or any pandemic that would affect all supply chains. Or another example of a natural disruption would be some tsunami or accidents, earthquakes, all these example. And every time these things happen, they disrupt your supply chain. And sometimes the effect of this disruption is catastrophic. So you want to minimize that risk. And this is one point where managers spend most of their time. So which means they would think about all their options, that okay, one of the things they would do is that they might have multiple suppliers. One manager might be thinking that okay, there's one supplier, they may create a problem or supply chain might be disrupted, and let's have multiple suppliers. But if you go for multiple suppliers, then variations in quality will be inevitable unless you have some very strong quality assurance systems. So all these considerations, they constitute what we call as managing risk. And then here is benefits and risk of outsourcing. Again, that's one of the key decision which managers have to make. So one of the benefit is that lower prices may result from lower labor cost. There might be some people who are specializing in a job, and if they do that, that can be much beneficial. For example, Apple focuses more on design part, but when it comes to manufacturing, it's Foxconn that's doing all this thing because they have competencies. The ability of organization to focus on its core strength, so that's another advantage, which means you don't have to focus on other thing, you focus on the core part where you are really good. It permits a conversion of some fixed cost to variable cost. A fixed cost, which means if you are doing your own manufacturing, then there are fixed costs associated with that, and you convert it into variable cost, which means when you outsource it, then those fixed costs are not needed. It will become variable cost. It can free up capital to address other needs. Your capital supply would increase, and you can invest that capital in other places, and some risk can be shifted to the supplier. That's another advantage, a benefit of outsourcing, the ability of to take advantage of suppliers expertise, so make it easier to expand outside of the home country. And there are some risks, and one of the risks is that your knowledge may be spilled, inflexibility due to longer lead times, and increased transportation cost happens. Language and cultural differences, they can be one problem. Loss of jobs and the loss of control. When someone else is doing manufacturing for you, you don't have control because you are not doing it, someone else is doing it. And then maybe lower productivity could be another issue, and loss of business knowledge. This is one of the most important factor, that for instance, let's say when Tesla goes to China, Chinese government requires that Tesla provides all the blueprints, which mean all the specifications. Tesla has to provide all this information to Chinese government before it can start doing business. When you share your secrets and trade secrets and technological competencies with other people, then there could be a problem. And the last thing is that increased effort required to manage the supply chain, because again, it's not just vertical integration. The idea of vertical integration is that a company is doing most of their parts itself. For example, one of the best example is Tesla. We know Tesla is a car company, but one of the key component in electric vehicles is battery. So Tesla makes its own batteries. Initially, it set up a collaboration with Panasonic of Japan, and it also has its own gigafactories. It also produces its own batteries. It also produces its own seats. It has its plant in Fremont. Now, that's really the crazy part, which means most companies they don't do that. And actually, according to my knowledge, Tesla is perhaps the only one that also manufactures its own seats. And then we also know that Tesla makes its own softwares. And actually, basically, Tesla is an AI company, artificial intelligence company. The softwares that are required for self-driving cars, autonomous cars, and all the softwares programs that are required, Tesla makes it itself. So that is called as vertical integration. But many other companies get their supplies from other suppliers, and they are mainly assemblers, which mean they get parts from different suppliers and then they assemble them. And accordingly, risk could be higher. But when a company is vertically integrated, which means most of the components or all the components that it requires, it's making itself, then that's called vertical integration. There is another company that's called BYD. I think BYD stands for Build Your Dreams. It's a Chinese electric vehicle company. Warren Buffett is one of the main shareholders. He has big investment in this company. So that's also a unique company that's highly vertically integrated, which means they make their own batteries and then they make electric cars. So that gives them an advantage compared to those electric vehicle assembling company who buy batteries from suppliers outside. So these are some pros and cons of outsourcing, which mean managers they have to evaluate all these factors before making a decision.